Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women Talking Money podcast. My name is Gretchen from Magenta Financial Planning, and today I'm joined by Tracy Vegro. Tracy is the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments, and she's a former city regulator. She's worked at Whitehall, the Cooperative Group, Solicitors Regulation Authority, and the Financial Reporting Council. But she's been with the CISI since September 2022 and is keen to make sure the CISI is seen to be modern and relevant. I know also that she was the FRC's diversity champion and led a number of initiatives aimed at boosting diversity on FTSE boards. And finally, in 2020, Tracy was awarded an OBE for services to business and diversity. So welcome, Tracy, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Gretchen. That was a lovely introduction, a very warm welcome. Thank you so much.
So, well, just so impressive, so much stuff you've done. So as I was reading it, I'm thinking, goodness, lots and lots to talk about and things to share, no doubt, from, what you've been involved in over the years. Do you want to just give me a little sort of few minutes about whatever you'd like to focus on, be it things that you're doing at the CISI or things that you thought would be relevant today to kind of share with everyone that's listening?
Well, I think when I was thinking about what I might say, I was first struck by looking back at my very young self, deciding to go into Whitehall as a career straight after university, my interest in public policy, the public interest. I kind of think that taught me quite a lot now for where I am as a membership body, which is all about making sure that we're doing the right things by our members and the diversity of our membership, whether it's people who are advising individuals or big investment institutions who are doing, banking type work. That understanding about where you make the difference as an individual, whatever job you're in, has probably stayed with me quite a lot. And then the other aspect to it is about, as women especially, I can say this to you as another woman, you do doubt yourself quite a lot. And so when you are then in a role like I'm in here, building skills, education, lifelong learning, making sure that all of us have got the skills and, confidence to go out and make a difference in the roles we're in. I think that's become ever more important to me. And I see all the time that, lots of people with lots of opinions get lots of airtime, but is it making a difference at that really sort of level where you're building trust, you're understanding that financial services is a very, very broad sector, but it's actually crucial to the functioning of the economy and making sure that individuals have fulfilling lives. So, I don't want to sound grandiose about it, but I do think that the work we do here at CSI is really very important. And probably we don't, all of us, think about the significance of what we're doing and the roles we're all playing day to day that help people plan their futures and have a successful and happy life.
Absolutely. I think also, I feel like sometimes we're because of the little bubble that we live in, because everyone generates this kind of people that they're used to being around, maybe the quality of advice or the quality of skill set that people are delivering near you. And it's only when I step out of that little bubble that I think, wow, we're actually doing a pretty good job, because I can reflect on outside of the bubble and think, what's going on.
Yeah, I completely agree. But you don't take time enough to reflect, do you, and think about the differences you make in sort of small ways and big ways. And a lot of small differences can mount up to be something quite important. And some of the kind of things you hear about, the advice gap, people not starting to think about pensions and things at an early enough age. There's stuff where there's no one really knows where to go for the information that's properly sort of, a good standard or trusted. And all of those things are quite easy to talk about, but quite hard to deliver change in. And I think that's why it's so important that we all just kind of take a bit of time and discuss things a little bit more. And again, for a membership body, a chartered body, I think all of this, the chartered bodies, ours or others like the chartered bankers or something, it's got to be kind of a standard that everybody can trust. And I think that's probably something we've underestimated about what we do and how we can align to make the public definitely understand that they can trust the advice that they're getting, and that on the basis of that trust, you can make some really quite well-informed decisions. You're not taking risks or unnecessary risks. And in a world where there's inevitably always going to be risk, then that's quite an important role we play.
Certainly. And I mean, just to round it off, I think, as you say, how do people listening who know nothing about or know something about finance, but we're also got so much risk now with, finfluencers who can become influencers online that actually don't have any qualifications, when I'm, worked really hard to become chartered and certified. But we don't promote enough about how important it is for your, security, as you say, reduction in risk, being able to trust the advice that you get, how important those qualifications and having that being with a corporate body like the CISI is really important when you're looking at an advisor as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. And again, this is why I'm always glad to take time to do things like this, because, I think all of us at the organisation, CISI, we're all ambassadors for the organisations and we're all advocates for our members. Our standards on things like disciplinary are very, very high. And any complaints about one of our members or a member firm is taken extremely seriously. I'd say, again, chartered bodies are underestimated in terms of government as to the role we're playing. Because there's a big debate at the moment, isn't there, about growth and whether we've over-regulated and when there's going to be a push on deregulation. I, as a citizen, would feel happier about that, knowing that there are bodies like ours who are doing some of that, not regulation, but setting the standards and enforcing integrity and ethics and so on, which means you can be a bit more liberal when it comes to regulation and allowing for more growth. To me, clarity, understanding rules, membership organisations that have strong disciplinary processes, it's fulfilling a role that otherwise would be more costly for society or the taxpayer or business or whoever is paying for the cost of that regulation. So it's almost we're fulfilling a kind of self-regulatory remit. And I think the standards are higher. You're never going to get rid of people who are out to intentionally mislead. You touched on finfluencers, but there's all sorts of advertisements, isn't there? AI generated, deep scams and all this kind of stuff. The world has just got way more risky. So again, seeking advice from trusted sources, it's a reality check, isn't it, on fabulous best case scenario that someone might have presented with you, on some kind of email in your inbox one morning. So, more and more I'm seeing the importance of what we do. And I'm really touched by what you said about, we have got a job to do to promote how high standards are that our members meet.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you. I think that was a good piece of starting introduction to everything. And, as you're aware, the podcast is just about opening up the conversation about money. It doesn't necessarily, we're not talking financial advice here. We're talking, our own experience of money and people sharing that with me. So I really appreciate you coming on to do that as well, because it's probably slightly different from what you're usually doing. So that's quite fun.
I just hope I didn't disappoint, Gretchen.
No,
I think I'm quite dull when it comes to my own money, but we'll see.
Nothing wrong with dull and money sometimes. I've just read something online about that. So, we don't all have to be doing anything too fantastic and exciting. So, Tracy, tell me about what your earliest memory of money is and sort of those things that you learned as a child and how that might have shaped your views as you grew up.
So it was really sort of interesting thinking back. So I grew up in the country in Yorkshire and I'm an only child. So I genuinely was quite compliant and eager to please. I spent a lot of time with adults, and particularly my mother and my grandmother. I used to love, I was quite bookish, but pocket money day, which was Saturday morning, was always a really exciting time. So I was a really rather sort of simple soul because I had a proper money box. And I think I'm right in saying I was absolutely scrupulous about every week not spending any of it, but adding it all up. So I really, at an early age, liked the idea that it only got more. And I think I'm also right in saying I was incentivized that once I got to £1, I got an extra 10p or something. That was the process. So I think from quite a young age, my parents were probably quite good at stimulating the idea that if you're careful with your money, you make more money. And it's all very nice to go away and buy whatever it is I might have wanted to buy, but actually saving up and thinking about what do you really want, and actually the bigger thing and the bigger price. So I think I probably was brought up in a quite sort of sensible and old-fashioned way. But pocket money, Saturday morning, pocket money day was a big deal. And then I think, like other women, I'll fess up here, I probably got a bit more giddy once I got a little bit older and decided I quite liked a nice dress or a this or a that or a, you get quite girly. And so I think I probably learned in my older sort of 20s, you got to think about, do you really need it? I've got some things still sitting in my cupboard now that I probably randomly bought in, a nice store somewhere, and never really got the value out of. So, I went through that phase too. And then now I'm probably tediously dull and boring and thinking about what life as a middle-aged person is, and how early can I retire? And, what do I need to do? And how do you maintain the kind of lifestyle that you've got in your 50s into what might be, I don't know, we're all living till we're 90 or something. That period you now have to manage is not a short period, is it? And it's not something we Brits really like talking about. Again, I pay tribute to you. It's quite interesting getting people, even people who work in financial services, talking about their own money journey. We're really reluctant to talk about it. And even like with my own children, I've got twin daughters, both in their very first jobs now, post-uni. And we probably don't talk sensibly enough to them about things either. And so we all know we can do more. It's just really difficult to find the opportunity to do it. But, in looking back, I think I was pretty lucky because I'm from the generation of women who probably were the first to really rise to quite senior levels in their careers. I went through university very happily. I didn't come out with any student loan. It didn't exist in my day. So you went straight from, study into a job. My first job was in London with the civil service in Whitehall. But in those days, and so on were nothing like people have to pay now. You could still have a life where you could go out of an evening and have drinks with friends. You could go to the theatre. Things now that you do as a sort of way of switching off and enjoying yourself cost so much more. So again, factoring in what life looks like, what's your bare minimum. And sometimes I get almost ashamed of how easy it was as a young person to start a career that's been very fulfilling and rewarding for me, and gave me lots of opportunities and choices. I never had to take a job just because it was more money, because I was on that kind of awful treadmill people are on now, where they're kind of trying to clear their student loan, all of these things, and get to some sort of level playing field earlier on. And I never had to face buying properties at the prices people have to pay now. So, I feel probably one of the most lucky of that generation, where lots of things went absolutely in my favour. And maybe I didn't have to make quite sort of harsh choices to extend, my spending capacity or something. So, I do feel very lucky. And I do feel that all of us just need to, particularly as an employer here, we've just done the annual pay rounds and so on. And one of the things I was pleased our board did was look at the people who are on the most minimum salaries. And we tried to get everybody up from the bare minimum, because people are good people. They take a job for experience. But there's after a while, we wanted to just make sure, job leveling and stuff was fair. We weren't baking any inequalities on, inadvertently. So things like that, exercises like that, I think now as somebody who is the female leader of this organization, as the CEO, I'm just a bit more conscious about how things can go a bit awry in different people's careers and things, and if you don't have a framework that's transparent and fair. So things like that, I think I've learned over the years as well, not just about my personal thing, but it's about the kind of organisation you choose to be part of.
And
Sorry,
how
that's
are
quite a
you?
long-winded answer,
No,
but I
no.
was thinking about it. Your questions were very stimulating about what would you do now and what would you tell your younger self. And I was thinking, yeah, that's really good questions. We never ask that, do we? We never stop to think like that.
Yeah. And so you mentioned your twin daughters and just like how you reflect on, your career, to date and the fact that, you kind of, I guess, had it lucky in a way with how finances were at that time, no student debt. I mean, they are then that generation now who are really up against it when it comes to properties, when it comes to managing and juggling, I guess, social life and mandatory bills, etc. But I think even it kind of almost like the same things have to apply in the same way of kind of budgeting and things. So I mean, you said they've just got their first jobs. Like, how are they managing, or are they still living with you? Like, is that what's going on?
Well, I'm mortified to tell you they didn't come back and live with us. No, only very briefly for a matter of weeks. So they're both flat sharing. I'm interested to judge how people, maybe used to have a flatmate, now have three. That is the reality of living in central London. And if all the jobs are in central London or another big city, I'm told everywhere, it doesn't matter if you're in Edinburgh, Leeds, or London. And things and accommodation is really, really the biggest part of where your salary goes. So, I don't know what the answer is from a sort of bigger picture lens. I think kids today work incredibly hard. I think the life you have, working life, when you've got this blend of hybrid, when are you in the office? How are you learning and picking up skills that are going to enable you to advance your career? I learned literally from day one by all the people that were around me and I work with. And as I say, I never felt that I had to make a compromising choice about a job.
Mm.
Many people say, oh, I'm doing this. I don't think I'll love it, but I'll be okay in a few years. You're quite right. You introduced me. I used to be a regulator in the SRA, the legal regulator. And the number of people who go into law because they think, it'll be very well paid. There's a lot of work in legal services. But are people happy in that career? You hear some of the stories that we used to have in disciplinary about people making difficult choices. You compromise things because you don't want to put the firm in a difficult position, but that, you can easily get into doing some things that aren't great because you actually are so dependent on the money. And we have to ask ourselves, what is that going to lead to, in certain elements of life that are heavily regulated. But then equally, you've probably got some people who think this is the time now to try and be what I want to be. And they're probably going to be more inclined to be creative, do things differently. But then they're going to have to plan for a very different future too. So, you might see from a kind of broader wellness and well-being point of view that some of the choices people are making lead to problems further down the line, because you could argue that my career has been quite traditional. I joined the civil service. I got loads of training. I progressed pretty quickly. I then moved into regulation. I did a spell on secondment out to the cooperative bank, which had got into, headline grabbing trouble at the time. But we managed to turn that round, and it was one of the most exciting projects I ever worked on. But I was just seconded out. I was the woman from Whitehall. I was brought into something that could have had catastrophic effects for lots of people. But out of that, I'm always delighted when I walk past a new co-op store that's opened. The whole organisation almost went through a kind of reinvigoration, governance, and all the things were changed. And now they're doing really well. Sometimes you do learn in life that it's the things that don't go to plan that you probably learn more from. And I do wonder if that's not what happens when some people have a blip in their finances or their planning. Maybe some people come out of what looks like a difficult situation, like a divorce or something, with the right help and advice, they can get into pretty good shape again. So one thing I would say to everybody, nothing is ever the disaster you think, but it's about making sure you've always got options. And if I was a youngster in any job now starting out, I'd say you might not stay in that career. It's probably quite likely you won't. I won't get on about AI and taking everyone's job. I don't believe that AI is going to take
No.
everybody's job. But I do believe that AI will be quite an interesting enabler of change. And some of that change is bound to be good and some of it is bound to be not so good. But we won't know the full consequences yet. But one of the things I think AI might do is enable people to take advice when they need it. People seeing people in video calls as opposed to in person might enable people to reach different kinds of advice and so on that they might never have thought of doing if they'd had to make an appointment and go and book and see somebody somewhere and all that. Because people don't want to accept that they might need advice, I guess. And so that'll be a good thing that we can deliver too, is the more you talk about the need to get the right advice at the right time, because it makes for a better outcome. It shouldn't be something you have to convince people of. It should kind of be a norm. And again, I think women have seen sometimes that their needs were perhaps lesser to the broader family needs and so on. And I think more inclusive conversations about everybody's role in something is a good thing. And I haven't quite got to this stage yet, but I am very taken. I'm often asked to speak on panels. And recently I've been reading a book, Dr. Eliza Philby, I think it is. It's called Inheritocracy. And it's been really good because we are at the stage where we're caring for elderly parents and have children who are now young adults starting out and working and so on. And that's probably going to be happening way more now because everybody, fortunately, is living longer. And people are going to have to start out managing this sort of 3 generations of a family. And what's that going to do in terms of where the money goes and paying for caring costs and all of that? And what does that do in terms of what you might think might be a sort of family money that you might be able to also sort of factor into your retirement planning. So there's loads of things that, like, almost every day there's a new angle on something. And I don't think I've ever been quite so conscious of that, and that, there's some shifts in society that are really quite significant and that are going to make big issues around what happens on the welfare state. There's been lots of coverage, hasn't there, in the newspapers over the weekend about what's going to happen in terms of welfare cuts. But if their welfare is cut, the individual has to do more. Does every individual have to do more? Or some of us going to have to do more than others? How are we going to reshape it and maintain that kind of good level for everybody? Some of these things are quite important issues, aren't they? And we probably aren't, any of us, giving it quite enough thought.
There's some really big issues going, massive things going on. And all of those things, I guess, stemmed out of the conversation around your daughters and how life will be different for them as it was for you, and different than it was for me even, I certainly, I had student debt, but it's a different journey getting a job now than it was getting a job 25 years ago for me. It was completely different, So I think all of these things are going to have a massive change on how people cope with money, structure their financial plans, etc. I think what I'd love to think is, though, that with the advance of technology and the fact that hopefully we can start to talk about these things, is that maybe they'll be upskilled more in a budgeting situation so that they actually know, how to try and work through this. When I'm not convinced that most people that left school, we didn't have access to the online thing as much. And, a lot of people I've spoken to didn't even know what budgeting was when they left school or university. So even if there's a little bit more advancement for younger people in that regard, we would be better off, because you're starting out from a better position and then kind of muddling your way through and only really getting there when you're 30, kind of.
I think you're right, Gretchen. And I guess the good news is there are more channels to talk about things, aren't there? And as long as you know what's going to be right for you and the right sources of advice, there's definitely more opportunities to take advice in different ways. And that's got to be good, hasn't it? And it's certainly got to be good for the profession, because you want people to come in. You don't want there only to be a certain demographic of advisor, do you? That's all an opportunity as well as a sort of change. And we probably don't celebrate that enough, that actually more and more people, and simple pieces of advice like just track what you spent for a week. Sometimes these days you're paying for everything on your phone. I don't actually value maybe where I'm buying my coffee and what my loyalty points might get me and stuff, because you're on autopilot, aren't you? Every morning I'm ordering as I'm still sitting on the tube to pick up at my nearest coffee shop before I walk into my building. So they're sort of like hidden things, and you could make different choices, but we all become creatures of habit pretty easily too, and sometimes the habits aren't necessarily good for us. So there's loads of really simple things you can do, but we often try and look for a more complicated answer, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just trying to get back to my questions a little bit. How we talked a little bit about it, but how would you describe your current relationship with money if I asked you to do that in one word? And why would you pick that?
I'd say mature. So I'd say that I probably had been through that period where, you've had the sort of happy young days, you're single, you've got a job, you've progressed a bit, you're feeling good. I then got married, had children, got a more, all of the things that you kind of life stages. And I think what's good when you finally come through the situation where you no longer have a mortgage, that is a big freedom moment, I would say. And then you can start truly thinking about, well, shall I do this? Shall I do that? I have a much better understanding now of the opportunity cost in terms of investing in something that might make you a big return but might make you a complete loss, as opposed to putting cash in an ISA. Or I feel I've got time to consider things, and very fortunately can make some choices. So I think that's engaged my brain in maybe the last 5 years way more than in all of the previous ones, where you were always much more on having a nice life and affording to live where you lived. And as I said right at the start, I live in London, and now to contemplate having the kind of family life we had when we were younger where we live would almost be impossible, I think. And that's just happened in years, not in hundreds of years. And I don't think anybody's quite written the social history of that yet, and what that's done and what it's done in terms of sense of community and all of that will take ages to unravel, I guess. But it's been quite an interesting time. But through all of it, I've learned that you do have to make choices and good decisions. But on all of it, for certain stages of your life, when you do have responsibilities, young children and mortgages and things, you have to make sensible choices. When you've got a little bit more time and you're a little bit older, and you don't have to do the standard thing, the cash ISA and all of this, you actually could do a bit more. And I'm always really struck by where innovation comes from in society, and the people who are creating new drugs, new way of healing people, looking at things like online services on things that people could never do otherwise. Access to legal advice in this country is terrible. There's all a legal aid desert now, whereas online law tech is quite game changing. In lockdown, when I stood at the SRA, we did a project about domestic violence and just how much it rose during lockdown, which was terribly sad, but actually using it to triage to where to people to get help and so on, and that kind of stuff. It really was massively positive thing out of a terrible situation. So I'm quite interested in where you can get involved as a small scale investor in something that could be quite big. So it's things like that I think are really good opportunities now as well. So I'd encourage everybody who's thinking about investment to be 3 parts very cautious and 1 part much less cautious, if you're in a fortunate position that you're able to do that, because then you're also funding things that are really innovative and potentially game changers for lots of people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So we've talked a little bit about, well, we've kind of covered off things like, I know now, we've talked about your life stage and where you're at. So obviously, as the children have left, it means that, you can start to think about what do those 30 to 40 plus years look like in retirement? As we know, it's a lot longer than ever has been before. But how do you think you're juggling? You've talked a bit about investing. I'm keen to understand how you're managing that now with enjoying life, still living in London, working in London, doing all these things. I know you're incredibly busy. And then thinking about, right, I got to bank that for, those future years that are now longer than ever before. How are you finding that balance and kind of sticking with that?
Well, even before I came to CSI, we do have an advisor, and it's a female. I chose my husband and I, we chose together, but I chose a female. I won't mention her or whether for any sort of
No.
permission. But I think waking up to the fact that no matter how sure you are of your own judgment, it's always good to get some external advice. I really would say that's one of my biggest life lessons. And I think often with financial planning and so on and investment advice, you don't look at it in the same category. I wouldn't not go to the doctor if I wanted help about, how I did something related to my health. I wouldn't not go to a dentist. So why have we all been quite reluctant to seek other forms of professional advice? I think that's an important message. And again, if I was still in Whitehall, I'd be doing a lot about how are we going to get Britain to think about saving and investing and all of this. You can't just say the economy's got to grow, can you? Because it's only going to grow with all of us investing in new ideas, new opportunities, new products, all of us being active consumers but informed consumers, because you don't want lots of people who are unhappy consumers. So all of this thing, it's a kind of ecosystem, isn't it? And I think I've become a lot more conscious of the role of independence and proper advice at the right stages. So that's been one of the changes I note. And then the other thing I'd say is making sure, and we're lucky at CSI, we're an educational charity. We're really committed to our members and our membership and all of that CPD and all the stuff we do as the day job. But we also have educational objectives and goals. So things like projects around financial literacy, I think that's another thing that, even if I weren't in this job, I would still be really passionate as a citizen about making sure that everybody can't say, you know what, that's not my thing, actually starts understanding the choices that they'll have to make, particularly now with things like auto enrollment and all of these things. You've kind of marched to a certain point, aren't you? But then you're left to it. And I do think that a lot more could be done about working in, ways that are just demystifying for people and saying, no, this is for everybody. This kind of advice is freely available. This is the sort of thing, lots of people can tell you at a regional or local, or, community type level. So I think things like that are very important too. And then thirdly, I'd say all of us have a responsibility to just be good about helping other people. Often it's no more than making sure that on a website we are offering signposts to different things. We've got a brilliant media team here in comms. We signpost to lots of research studies that go out. We try and contribute to consultation exercises that the FCA or government or Treasury or somebody might do, because all of ours, I see it as very much a community of practice. And I think CSI's voice as a kind of, an authoritative commentator is something that we all play a part in. Every one of us who works here, but also every one of our members, we've all got to support and represent each other, because we're playing an important role, but many people wouldn't know that. And so at every opportunity, I try and use any small or bigger platform just to kind of make sure people understand. The sooner you start thinking about planning for your future, the more likely it is that's going to be sustainable and happy one. And it's not dull to talk about money. We've got to get over that kind of reserve, haven't we, about let's talk about money. The sooner and the more often you all start talking about money, the more likely you are to get to a better answer in terms of what your circumstances are at any given time.
I think the talking about money thing is really funny. It popped into my brain earlier when you said something. She said, we just don't, I know we don't talk about it enough. And reflecting on your, when you were thinking about these questions and like, are we talking about it enough? I think it's such a challenge because there's a lot of work around financial coaching and how as a couple, you should set time aside to, talk about money, have a money date, or as a family, you should make sure you've talked about money. The reality is nowadays, it's very rare that everyone's all together, not without something else distracting them. And when you are, it's probably like, especially if it's my family, it'd be like, a celebration of some kind, an anniversary of some kind, a birthday of some kind. The last thing you want to do is go, right, we're all in the room. Now we've got to make sure we have this conversation about, and when you're meeting with friends, which is fewer times than, we used to, as you've sort of alluded to, we haven't got as much money. There's less social engagement. There's more engagement sort of in your house or online and on mobile phones rather than physically seeing people. The last thing you want to do when you're out with your friends is go, oh, by the way, I've been thinking about this, and we don't have that conversation. I actually want to challenge everyone to kind of think, just once a month, just to go like, I'm going to at least talk to someone about, ask a question or say, I've been thinking about this. What are your, views? And quite often we talk about how when you were younger, maybe you did it more freely because you wanted to know about mortgages or you were worried about whether you could afford the rent. And so we were more open. And then we go into this closed kind of era where kind of feel more financially secure. We don't feel we need to talk about it anymore because we kind of got things. So, do you see what I mean? I think that's where I'd like to break that open a little bit more.
I think you'd be really onto something, Gretchen, if you did that, the kind of moments we do or don't share. And you almost could do a sort of, there's a bit of a strap line for each, aren't there? You might want to now talk about what you're going to have for pudding, but just take 10 minutes to talk about something else. Because I don't think we're where we need to be yet. I think there's been a lot more progress. There's been a lot more myths busted, if you like. And, I never like to talk about, downside news, but whatever happens, nothing is always a golden opportunity forever. There's always a sort of something comes, doesn't it? So thinking about what the plan B might be is also always really useful, I think. And don't then feel panicked into doing something that's not maybe the right course for you. So I totally on side with you about we've got to try and make the opportunities. And, maybe a bit like, getting people to save energy or something. On paper, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? Why wouldn't you want to save energy, help the planet, all these things? But do people ever do energy efficiency improvements in their home? No, they don't. How often do people think about changing their boiler to what? There's lots of these things that in life we just always put to the next thing down on the list. You never really deal with. And so thinking about, from being really quite small, how do you engage people in that savings journey or whatever, I think really would be quite an important thing. And men, again, maybe not something we at CSI do enough of. We probably could do a lot more with different members in different regions maybe, or you could almost have a kind of a regional kind of, not a competition exactly, but a bit of a sort of look across what's happening in different parts of the country and stuff. And you could make a bit of a sort of think of it, what is the postcode that saves the most? I've no idea. How could you get that data? You could make it a bit of a competition, couldn't you? What does ONS data tell you about X, Y, or Z pension age or something? I've just no idea.
There's loads of stuff.
Yeah, what different professions approaches to, do lawyers save more than accountants? I mean, that would be a great start, wouldn't it? I'm assuming accountants and bankers are the best people who know how to plan for their retirement and save, but maybe I'm
we
wrong.
know that that's not always the case because we know that, even though you do it, you might do it day in, day out, talk about it all the time, doesn't mean you've got all your kind of things aligned. And I think that's what's fascinating, isn't it?
Shoes, isn't it? And all that. Yeah, no, you're probably quite right. But you know what I mean? You've got to have like a fun way, haven't you, of brokering these kind of conversations. And I think I've started to think a lot more about that since I've been at CISI. I mean, I can't believe I've been here nearly 3 years. And
neither can I.
Has literally like raced by. And when I particularly visit some of the regions, like, going to one of the regional branch dinners or something, you just see the buzz in the room and how committed our profession is to making a difference. Some of the things that we've got behind us projects is really, really, almost brings a, lump to my throat in terms of pride. But doing that and unleashing that sort of passion on a broader canvas, that would be really interesting too. And how do we do that? But we'll get there, I'm sure. And increasingly I meet lots of people. I've just come back from visiting Colombo, and that's where a lot of our operations are done, and they're predicting, I think it's 5% growth. It's gone from being in terrible political turmoil and economic massive inflation to settling down really nicely. And because they've invested so much in people's education and so on, people are staying in the economy and they're not seeing massive migration like they used to. And you think, yeah, that's interesting then. So that's going to be a very, very interesting part of the world to see how they deal with things like personal financial planning, how the state and finance goes. So, you've got opportunities as well to learn from people who are almost not starting with a huge kind of catalogue, if you know what I mean. How do people look at it? People talk all the time about Australia, don't they, and the super and how they've sorted out pensions and all of that. But what are the downsides of some of that, and why is it that it's not done elsewhere? What are the characteristics? So there's lots of things. I'm always very interested in data and what the data tells you, because you can get lots of people who have very strong views, but if it's not supported by data, it's not always easy to think about what you do to make a difference. Whereas if you understand the data and what's driven people to do X as opposed to Y, you're often in a better position for coming up with something that might, facilitate change.
Yeah. So I'm just aware of our time. We've had a great chat, but my final question will be this one, which is around, if you could give a piece of financial advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I guess, given what we've talked about, I think it would be just ask. Don't feel that you need to be quiet, do more research, wait for a better time. And there's no such thing as a bad question. If this is about the difference between this rental or that rental or this whatever or that, think about it. And then the other thing I tell myself is be sure you're doing something you love. Because anybody who has got a career ahead of them these days, if you're not, don't just do it because you think it's a means to an end. You'll never be happy. Definitely invest in something you really want to do. And 9 times out of 10, you will be successful at it, but you'll also learn. And making sure you have a life that is full of learning will be the way to have the most rewarding professional life, I'd say.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like I probably had 5 more questions and we could have gone on for ages, but
Well, you're very easy to talk to, Gretchen. And as I say, I definitely think it's an important topic. I don't think we're anywhere near there. I still hear people, literally on the tube, I hear people as I'm going home to young women talking and saying, oh, yeah, I should look at that, but I just won't get time. And, really haven't got it because I'm down to like my last 5p and I'm only going to eat chips this week. And you just think that's mad, absolutely mad.
yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
put off the big conversations, can you?
No, and I also overhear and have conversations all the time. It's like our life, I call it life admin. Our life admin has got so big because of the incessant need from our mobile phones and everything else. And we're living in a much busier world. So how we've got to make sure that we carve out that time to take, like almost like take yourself away from digital and go, how am I going to sort this out? I need to talk to someone. I need to talk to a friend, a family member. I need to talk to an advisor.
Busy
Anything.
gets redefined every day of the week, doesn't it? There's a whole new level of busy. So I tell you, by some Fridays, I literally just think, oh my word, my brain can't take anymore. You've juggled so many things, you've scored so many things off your list, but there's still 8 left on the list, and you just think, oh my word, how did it go
and
so fast?
It seems to just get worse and worse. So I think we have to consciously carve out the time to talk about this stuff, get this stuff organized and put it at the high top end of our list. So thank you so much, Tracy. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Let us know if you need anything more, Gretchen. Always happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you.